The final box landed on the floor with a satisfying muffled thud. I straightened up, pressing my palms into the small of my back and surveying my new kingdom. It wasn't much of a kingdom, really. Just a one-bedroom apartment on the 7th floor of the Vista Point Towers. A name that was probably cooked up in a marketing meeting to sound more glamorous than that new concrete box downtown. But to me, it was a fortress. My last place had been cheap, a 3rd-floor walk-up with paper-thin walls where I knew far too much about my neighbors' fighting schedules and their questionable taste in late-night music. I'd spent 2 years listening to footsteps overhead, to the rumble of the garbage truck at 5 in the morning, to the constant, low-level hum of other people's lives bleeding into mine. I'd saved up for this. I'd paid the premium for the thick concrete floors, the double-paned windows, and the key fob-only access. I paid for silence. I paid for privacy. The air still smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. A sterile, chemical scent I found incredibly reassuring. I walked over to the large window in the living room. 7 floors up, the city was a sprawling grid of distant lights, and the muted river of traffic was a gentle, almost soothing rush of white noise. No shouting. No stereos, just the anonymous hum of a city at work. Perfect. My own little sterile box in the sky. The next few days were a blur of unpacking and organizing. I found a place for everything. My worn-out paperbacks went on the built-in shelves. My collection of coffee mugs was arranged in the sleek, minimalist kitchen. My ridiculously large collection of throw pillows found a home on the new gray sofa. It was slowly transforming from a generic rental unit into my space, my nest. Every time I heard the heavy thump click of the solid core door closing and locking behind me, a little wave of relief washed over me. Safe. Secure. I barely saw my neighbors. And that was exactly how I liked it. There was a young couple across the hall who I once shared an awkward elevator ride with, both of us staring at our phones. There was a woman on the corner unit with a tiny, yapping dog that I sometimes heard through her door as I passed. And then there was the man from the floor above me, 8B. I saw him a couple of times during that first week. He was maybe in his late 30s, early 40s. Tall, thin, with pale skin that seemed like it never saw the sun. He had dark, intense eyes that always seemed to be looking at something just past my shoulder. The first time, we were both waiting for the elevator. I gave him the obligatory tight-lipped neighbor smile. He just gave a curt nod, his eyes flicking down to the floor indicator and staying there. The second time, he was getting his mail when I walked in. He didn't even look up, just methodically sorted his letters before turning and heading back to the elevator without a word. Quiet. A bit odd, maybe. But quiet was good. Quiet was the whole point. The last thing I wanted was an overly friendly neighbor who wanted to borrow sugar and chat in the hallway. Mr. 8B seemed like he was on the exact same page. It was about 2 weeks in, on a Tuesday night, when it happened for the first time. I'd had a long day at work, the kind where your brain feels like a wrung-out sponge by the time you clock out. All I wanted was a hot shower and the mindless comfort of a book. My little sanctuary was delivering perfectly. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I changed into my pajamas, a soft worn-out t-shirt and shorts, and was curled up in my bed, reading. The window was closed, the air conditioning breathing a cool, steady stream of recycled air into the room. And that's when I smelled it. It was faint at first, so faint I thought I was imagining it. It was a sweet smell. Overpoweringly sweet, like a flower. A lily, maybe. You know, that heavy, almost cloying perfume you smell at a funeral home. But there was something else woven into it. Something underneath the sweetness. It was a damp, musty smell. Like potted plants that have been overwatered for weeks, the soil starting to go sour and rot from the roots up. Sweet and rotten. All at once. I put my book down on my chest. I sniffed the air again. It was definitely there, a ghost of a scent hanging in the room. My first thought was the trash. I had thrown out the remains of a chicken salad for lunch. Maybe that was it. I slid out of bed, my bare feet cold on the hardwood floor, and went into the kitchen. I pulled out the trash bin from under the sink and gave it a cautious sniff. Nothing but the faint, normal smell of a day-old garbage bag. No cloying sweetness, no rot. Okay, so not the trash. I walked back into the bedroom, sniffing the air like a bloodhound. The smell seemed to be gone now, vanished as quickly as it had appeared. I checked the small vase on my dresser. I'd bought a small bouquet of daisies to celebrate the new place, but they had wilted a few days ago and I'd thrown them out. I picked up the empty glass vase and sniffed it. Nothing. Just glass. I walked around the whole apartment, sniffing at vents at the corners of the room, feeling progressively more ridiculous. I opened the hall closet. just the smell of my winter coat and old boots. I opened the front door and sniffed the hallway. The air out there was neutral, tinged with the faint, generic scent of carpet cleaner the building used. The smell, whatever it was, had been confined entirely to my bedroom. I closed the door, frustrated and confused. I figured it had to be the building's ventilation system. That was the only logical explanation. Maybe the people in the apartment next to me, or below me, had some aggressively fragrant potpourri, or had let some flowers go bad, and the smell was getting sucked into the HVAC and pumped into my room. It was annoying, but in a building this large, things like that were bound to happen. I made a mental note to complain to management if it happened again. I opened my bedroom window for a few minutes, letting the cool night air and the distant city sounds flush out the room. When I closed it again, the phantom scent was gone. I got back into bed, picked up my book, and tried to find my place, but the strange, sweet, and rotten smell lingered in my memory. It was unsettling. It didn't belong. In this clean, sterile, controlled environment I had paid so much for, it felt like a tiny, dirty fingerprint on a perfectly clean window. A subtle little sign that I wasn't as sealed off from the world as I thought. For the rest of the week, nothing happened. The smell didn't come back. I started to forget about it, writing it off as a one-time fluke, a weird atmospheric quirk of a new building. I settled back into my routine, enjoying the peace, the silence, the glorious anonymity of my fortress. The brief encounter with the strange scent was just a weird footnote in the story of my perfect new life. Then came Saturday night. I'd been out with friends, had a couple of drinks, and got home around midnight. I was tired, a pleasant, sleepy kind of tired. The hallway was silent, the building was asleep. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and was wrapped in the familiar, comforting quiet of my own space. I went through my nightly ritual, kicking off my shoes, dropping my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, washing my face in the bathroom. The water was cold on my skin, waking me up just a little. I padded into my bedroom, the only light a pale sliver from the hallway. The room was dark and still. I pulled back the covers on my bed and slid in, the sheets cool against my legs. I took a deep breath, ready to sink into sleep. And there it was again. It wasn't a faint whiff this time. It was a definite, deliberate presence in the air. That same sickly sweet smell of lilies. But the undertone of decay was stronger now. It was heavier, thicker. It reminded me of a greenhouse where beautiful, exotic flowers were growing right on top of a compost heap. The scent wasn't just floating in the room. It felt like it was actively seeping in from somewhere. It curled into my nostrils, a tangible, oily thing. It smelled like something beautiful was dying. Slowly and quietly, somewhere very, very close by. I lay there in the dark, perfectly still, my eyes wide open, staring up at the ceiling I couldn't see. My heart, which had been beating in a slow, sleepy rhythm, started to pick up speed. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't random. It was here again, stronger than before, invading the one place I was supposed to be safe. And as I lay there, holding my breath, I had the distinct and terrifying feeling that the smell was coming from somewhere right inside the room with me. I lay there, frozen. My knuckles were white where I gripped the edge of the duvet. You know that feeling when you're a kid, and you're sure there's a monster under your bed? You don't dare move, you don't dare breathe too loud, as if the slightest sound will confirm its existence and give it permission to grab your ankle. It was exactly like that. A primal, childish fear, but I was 26 years old in a high-security apartment building. The smell was the monster. It wasn't coming from one spot. It was just in the air. A thick, sweet perfume of white lilies, heavy and funereal, with that foul, wet earth undertone of decay. It felt like it was coating the back of my throat, an oily film I couldn't swallow away. My mind raced, trying to find a logical anchor. The vents. It had to be the vents. Someone on another floor was a chain smoker with a bizarre taste in air fresheners, or maybe they were a botanist growing some strange, pungent fungus. It was a shared building after all. Air gets circulated. But it was only in my apartment, and primarily, it seemed, only in my bedroom. After what felt like an hour of lying rigid in the dark, I couldn't take it anymore. I threw back the covers, swung my legs out of bed, and marched over to the wall, flicking on the light. The sudden brightness made me flinch. The room was exactly as I'd left it. My book was on the nightstand, my water glass was half full, my clothes for work were laid out on the chair. There was nothing. No rotting flowers, no hidden source of decay, just a clean, normal room, and with the lights on, the smell, it seemed to have faded. It was still there, a ghost in the background, but it wasn't the suffocating presence it had been in the dark. I slept on the sofa that night, or tried to. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, made me jump. My fortress felt breached. The silence I had paid for was now filled with a phantom menace my eyes couldn't see. The next few days were a special kind of hell. The smell played games with me. It was a capricious visitor. I'd come home from work, unlock my door, and brace myself. Sometimes, nothing. The air would be sterile and clean, and a wave of relief would wash over me so intense it left me lightheaded. I'd start to think I'd imagined the whole thing, that maybe I was just run down and my senses were playing tricks on me. On those nights, I felt normal. I'd cook dinner, watch TV, and feel the comforting shell of my privacy rebuilding itself around me. Then there were the other nights. I'd open the door, and it would be there waiting for me, a faint, sweet warning. It would grow stronger throughout the evening, a slow-building dread that settled in my stomach. It was always strongest in the bedroom. I took to closing the bedroom door as soon as I got home, trying to contain it, but that almost made it worse. It felt like I was quarantining a disease, acknowledging its power. I started dreading going to bed. I'd stay up late on the sofa, scrolling aimlessly on my phone until I was so tired I couldn't keep my eyes open. Then I'd make a mad dash for the bedroom, dive under the covers, and try to fall asleep before the smell could fully register. I was losing my mind. The lack of sleep was making me edgy at work. I'd be in a meeting and suddenly think, can they smell it on me? A ridiculous thought, I know, but the paranoia was starting to set in. This thing, whatever it was confined to my apartment, but it was making me feel contaminated, marked. That's when I called Sarah. Sarah's my best friend. She's the most grounded, no-nonsense person I know. If a tire is flat, she'll have the jack out and the spare on before I've even finished complaining about it. If I was going crazy, she would tell me. Gently, maybe, but she'd tell me. I needed an outside opinion. I needed a witness. Hey, you busy Friday night? I asked her over the phone, trying to sound casual. I'm still drowning in boxes over here. I was thinking of ordering pizza and a bottle of cheap wine if you wanted to come help me christen the new place. Finally! I was wondering when I was going to get the grand tour, she said. I'm in. I'll even bring a housewarming plant, something you can't kill. A cold spike of dread went through me at the mention of a plant. No plant, please. Just bring the wine, I said, a little too quickly. Okay, geez. Touchy about the plant. Got it. See you around 7. Friday was one of the bad nights. I got home from work and the smell was already there, lurking. Not strong, but present. A quiet promise of what was to come. For a moment, I considered calling Sarah and canceling, making up some excuse. I was terrified of what she might say, but I was more terrified of being alone with it again. Sarah arrived at 7 on the dot, holding a bottle of red wine in one hand and a bag of garlic knots in the other. All right, let's see this palace, she announced, stepping inside. She walked through the living room, nodding in approval. Wow, this is nice. Like, grown-up nice. Look at all this natural light. And it's so quiet. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Yeah. It's quiet, I said. She peeked into the kitchen, then headed toward the back of the apartment. Is this the bedroom? She asked, pushing the door open. This was it. The moment of truth. I held my breath. She stepped inside. I watched her face for any sign, any flicker of disgust, a wrinkle of the nose. Nothing. She turned back to me, beaming. It's huge! And you have a walk-in closet? You are living the dream. She took a deep, deliberate sniff of the air. And it smells so clean in here. Like new paint and fresh laundry clean. You must have been scrubbing all day. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. You don't smell anything else? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Like, a little sweet or musty? She looked at me, her head cocked to the side. Sweet? Like what, perfume? She sniffed again, turning her head like a dog, trying to locate a sound. Nope. I smell paint. And whatever laundry detergent you use, which is nice by the way. What is it? It's nothing. Unscented. Well, whatever it is, it smells clean. Why? Did you spill something? I couldn't bring myself to say it. I couldn't tell her that for the past week, I'd been haunted by a smell that, to her, was completely non-existent. It sounded insane. It sounded like the beginning of a breakdown. No, I just thought I smelled something weird earlier. Must have been my imagination, I mumbled, forcing a smile. The rest of the evening was surreal. We sat on the floor in the living room, eating pizza straight from the box, and drinking wine from my new, mismatched mugs. We watched some terrible reality TV show and made fun of everyone on it. It was a perfectly normal, happy evening with my best friend. But for me, it was all happening behind a pane of glass. My mind wasn't on the TV or the conversation. It was on the closed bedroom door. Behind that door was a secret only I knew, an invisible poison that only I could perceive. Every so often, a faint, sweet waft would escape from under the door and drift into the living room, and I'd freeze mid-sentence. But Sarah never reacted. She just kept laughing, talking, completely oblivious. The feeling was worse than fear. It was a profound, terrifying loneliness. The problem wasn't just the smell anymore. The problem was me. Was I hallucinating? Was this some kind of rare side effect of stress? A tumor growing in my brain, messing with my olfactory nerves. My fortress hadn't just been breached. The enemy was already inside my head. Around 11, Sarah started yawning. All right, I gotta get going. I have to be up early tomorrow. I walked her to the door, my stomach twisting into a cold, hard knot. I didn't want her to leave. I wanted to grab her arm and beg her to stay, to tell her everything, to make her believe me. But what could I say? Please stay. The imaginary smell gets worse after midnight. Thanks for coming, I said, my voice hollow. It was good to see you. Anytime. Seriously, Anne, this place is amazing. You did good, she said, giving me a quick hug. And hey, don't work so hard. You seem a little wired. I watched her walk down the silent, carpeted hallway to the elevator. I waited until the ding echoed, and the doors slid shut. Then, I turned back to my apartment. I closed the door. The heavy lock made its solid, reassuring thump click. For a single, beautiful second, there was only silence. And then it slammed into me. It wasn't a wisp. It wasn't a ghost. It was a physical weight in the air. The cloying, sickeningly sweet stench of 1,000 rotting lilies hit me with the force of a wave, stealing the air from my lungs. It was thick, wet, and suffocating. It was 100 times stronger than it had ever been before. It filled the entire apartment now, not just the bedroom. It was as if the smell had been politely waiting in the wings for my guest to leave, as if it had been hiding, patiently, biding its time. And now that I was alone again, it was back, and it was furious. It was everywhere, and it was mocking me. That night, I did not sleep. The sofa was my raft in a sea of that sickening perfume. I lay on my back, staring at the textured white ceiling, listening. The thing is, when you pay a premium for a new, well-constructed building, you pay for silence. And I had it. There was no groaning of pipes, no thumping from the neighbors, no traffic noise from the street below. There was just the low hum of the refrigerator, and the frantic thumping of my own heart. The silence was absolute, a perfect, black velvet canvas, and that's when I heard the other sound. It was subtle, so subtle that at first, I thought I was imagining it, a phantom noise to go with the phantom smell. It was a dry, whispery scratching. A skittering. It came from above me, from the direction of the bedroom ceiling. My first thought, a desperate grasp at normalcy, was mice, or a squirrel that somehow got into the ceiling crawlspace. It happens, even in new buildings. Animals get in, they nest, they scratch. It was a perfectly logical, if unpleasant, explanation. I held on to that thought like a lifeline. It's just a mouse. I'll call the building management in the morning. Problem solved. But the sound wasn't quite right for a mouse. It was too deliberate. It would come in short bursts. A faint scratch, scratch, scratch. A pause. Then a soft ticking sound, almost like a fingernail tapping on metal. Then silence for a long time. Just when I would start to drift off, convincing myself I'd heard nothing, it would start again. Skitter. Scrape. Tap. It was always in the same place, directly over the bedroom. Over the next few days, I became an unwilling expert on the phenomena in my own apartment. I started keeping a mental log, a catalog of insanity. There were good days and bad days. On the good days, the air was clear, clean. I'd walk in from work and take a deep, greedy breath of nothing, and the relief was so profound it made my knees weak. On those days, there were no sounds from the ceiling. The silence was just silence, comforting and whole. Then there were the bad days. I'd open the door and the sweet, cloying fog would be there, waiting. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that tonight I would hear the scratching. The smell and the sound were a package deal. They were connected. The stronger the stench of rotting lilies, the more persistent the faint scratching and tapping from above became. Mice don't coordinate their activities with an imaginary smell. The paranoia was a physical thing now. It sat in my chest, a heavy, cold stone. I stopped using the bedroom entirely. It was a sealed-off zone, the door always closed. I moved my pillows and a duvet to the sofa permanently. I ate delivery food, standing up in the kitchen. I felt like a hostage in my own home, confined to the front half of the apartment by an invisible, scented barrier and its accompanying soundtrack. I started to look over my shoulder in the hallways. The few neighbors I saw, the ones I'd once offered a polite, distant smile, now looked like potential suspects. The woman in 12B with the yappy little dog? The young couple in 12F who were always arguing. Every closed door was a mystery. Every person a potential source of my private torment. The breaking point wasn't a crescendo of terror. It was a quiet moment of focus. It was a Tuesday evening, a very bad day. The smell was thick enough to taste, a foul syrup at the back of my throat. I was standing in the living room, frozen, listening to the faint scrape skitter from behind the closed bedroom door. And a thought, cold and clear, cut through the fog of my fear. Where is it strongest? I had been avoiding the source, but now, some grim, methodical part of my brain took over. I needed to know. I needed to map it. I took a breath, held it, and opened the bedroom door. The smell rolled out like a physical wave, and I gagged. It was 100 times worse in here. Concentrated. I forced myself to walk into the center of the room, turning in a slow circle, sniffing the air like a bomb-sniffing dog. It wasn't coming from the mattress, or the closet, or the bathroom. It was up. The higher I lifted my head, the stronger and more defined it became. My eyes tracked upward, past the tops of the windows, past the picture frames, to the smooth, white expanse of the ceiling. And there it was. The vent. A simple, rectangular metal grate, painted the same white as the ceiling, set almost directly over my bed. The building's HVAC system. Of course. It had to be the vent. I felt a surge of something that wasn't quite relief, but a kind of grim satisfaction. I wasn't crazy. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a brain tumor. Something was coming through the vent. But the sounds, the scratching and tapping, they were coming from there too. My mind raced, trying to fit the pieces together. Was it an animal that had died in the ventilation shaft? That would explain a smell of decay. But it didn't explain the sweet, floral perfume part of it. And it didn't explain why the smell came and went. A dead thing doesn't rot on a schedule. I spent the next 2 days in a state of high alert. Every time I was home, I was listening, watching that vent. I'd stand on my bed, craning my neck, trying to see through the narrow slats, but it was just blackness inside. The scratching continued, a maddeningly faint torment that only I seemed to be able to hear. I was losing weight. My hands had a perpetual tremor. At work, I'd stare into space, replaying the sounds in my head, trying to make them make sense. On Friday, I came home late. I'd worked overtime, more to avoid my apartment than for the money. My key fumbled in the lock, my whole body tense, preparing for the assault. I pushed the door open. It was a bad day. The smell was immediate, thick and suffocating. I dropped my bag by the door and, with a sense of weary dread, went straight to the bedroom. I had to know. I had to see. The late afternoon sun was slanting through the window, hitting the ceiling at just the right angle, and I saw it. I don't know how I hadn't seen it before. Maybe it hadn't been there. Maybe it was new. Around the edges of the metal vent grate, clinging to the textured ceiling, was a fine white powder. It wasn't dust. I know what dust looks like. Dust is gray, clumpy, made of fibers and dead skin. This was different. This was pristine. It was as white as chalk and as fine as flour. It looked almost like a delicate frost, or a dusting of pollen from some alien flower. It traced the rectangle of the vent perfectly, a faint, ghostly outline. I stopped breathing. My blood went cold. I just stood there, in the middle of my bedroom, a room I no longer slept in, and stared up at it. My mind started working, really working, for the first time in weeks. It wasn't trying to find a rational explanation anymore. It was accepting the impossible. Powder doesn't just appear out of a vent. Dust does. Pollen, maybe, in the spring. But this was a sealed, modern HVAC system. And this wasn't pollen, this was something else. It was too uniform, too deliberate. The scratching noises I'd been hearing, it wasn't an animal trying to get out. It was the sound of something being opened. Something being sprinkled. A faint tap-tap-tap of a container against the metal grate. Someone was putting this in my vent. The thought was so horrifying, so violating, that it almost didn't register. It was a movie plot. It was something that happened to other people in other places. Not to me. Not in my secure, expensive, quiet apartment. But the evidence was right there, 5 feet above my head, shimmering in the afternoon light. The smell of rotting flowers. The intermittent, purposeful scratching. The fine white powder. It wasn't a haunting. It wasn't a dead animal. It wasn't a fluke of the building's infrastructure. This was an act. This was an attack. Someone, somewhere in this building, was methodically, patiently, pumping this thing into my bedroom. Into the air that I was supposed to breathe while I slept. I sank down onto the edge of the mattress, my legs too weak to hold me. I didn't feel scared anymore. The fear had burned away, leaving something colder and harder in its place. I looked up at the white powder, the physical proof of this violation. I was being poisoned. Slowly, quietly, in the one place I was supposed to be safe. And looking at that fine dust, I knew with absolute certainty that I had to find out what it was. I had to see what was on the other side of that grate. I couldn't just stand there, I couldn't just know. You see, the worst part about a threat isn't the threat itself. It's the not knowing. It's the looking at a closed door and imagining what's behind it. But now, the door was open, just a crack. That white powder was the proof, the physical evidence, that my mind wasn't just falling apart. I wasn't going crazy. I was being targeted. The fear didn't go away, it just changed shape. It turned from a cold, creeping fog into something white-hot and sharp. A kind of furious adrenaline. I had to see. I had to know what it was. I had to look inside that vent. My movements felt strange, like I was watching someone else control my body. I walked out of the bedroom, my steps wooden on the laminate flooring, and went straight to the kitchen. My dining set was just a cheap thing from a big box store. 2 chairs and a small table. I grabbed the back of one of the chairs. It was light, almost flimsy. I dragged it into the bedroom. The sound of its legs scraping against the floor was loud in the silence, louder than the scratching from the ceiling had ever been. I positioned the chair directly under the vent, directly under the faint, powdery rectangle on my ceiling. It looked so ordinary. A simple metal grate, painted the same builder's grade white as everything else. If you weren't looking for it, you'd never notice it. And I guess that was the point. My hands were shaking. I put one hand on the back of the chair to steady it, and the other on the seat. I took a deep breath, which was a mistake. The smell, that sickeningly sweet smell of lilies and rot, filled my lungs again. It felt heavier now, more present, like it was coating the inside of my throat. I told myself it was my imagination. I was just spooked. I stepped up onto the chair. It wobbled for a second, a cheap, insecure piece of furniture. For a ridiculous moment, my biggest fear was that I was going to fall and break my ankle. I planted my feet, my cheap sneakers finding their balance. My head was only a foot or so from the ceiling now. I could see the texture of the popcorn finish, the sloppy paint job around the edges of the vent. And I could see the powder. Up close, it was just as I'd thought. Not dust. It was too fine, too crystalline. It didn't look like it had settled there naturally. It looked like it had been placed, puffed, gently blown out so it would cling to the rough texture of the ceiling paint. There was more of it than I could see from the floor, a soft, white deposit clinging to the metal slats of the grate itself. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. What was I doing? I should have called the police. I should have called building management. But what would I have told them? "Hi, I think my neighbor is puffing weird flower dust into my apartment." They'd think I was a crank. They'd send a maintenance guy up in a day or two, he'd wipe it down and tell me it was construction dust. I needed to see, I needed proof. I reached a trembling hand up, my fingers hovering inches from the grate. I just wanted to touch it, to see what the texture felt like. Maybe scrape a tiny bit off onto a piece of paper. That felt like a scientific, logical thing to do, a sane person's response to an insane situation. I never got the chance. Just as my fingertips were about to brush the cold metal, it happened. A soft whoosh. The building's central air conditioning kicked on. It happens a dozen times a day. A low hum starts up somewhere deep in the walls, and a gentle stream of air breathes out of the vents. It's a normal, background sound of apartment living. But this time, it was an attack. The puff of air that came out of the vent wasn't strong, but it was enough. It disturbed the fine, white powder that was resting on the slats. It lifted it. A swirling little cloud of white directly into my face. It was instantaneous. A dry, choking blanket. I jerked my head back with a gasp, but it was too late. I had inhaled. Deeply. The powder was in my nose, in my mouth, coating my tongue. It didn't have a taste, not really. It was just chalky and wrong. A violent, racking cough tore out of me. I doubled over on the wobbly chair, one hand flying to my mouth, the other flailing to grip the wall for balance. The coughs were deep and painful, my body trying desperately to expel the foreign substance. My eyes were watering, stinging from the dust. And then the second wave hit. It wasn't the coughing. It was a feeling, a sudden, terrifying wave of dizziness. The room, my familiar bedroom, didn't just spin. It tilted, like I was on the deck of a ship that had been hit by a rogue wave. The floor seemed to rush up to meet me, then recede. A powerful nausea churned in my stomach, hot and acidic. I thought I was going to vomit right there, on the chair. My head felt light, fuzzy, like it was stuffed with cotton. But the smell. Oh God, the smell. It wasn't the sweet, floral perfume anymore. By inhaling the source directly, I had bypassed the disguise. The cloying sweetness was gone, burned away. What hit my senses now, from the inside out, was the raw, uncut truth of it. It was a chemical stink. A sharp, medicinal odor mixed with the damp, earthy stench of true decay. Not flowers rotting in a vase, but something more fundamental. The smell of a specimen jar. The smell of a lab experiment gone wrong. It was the smell of rot and preservation, all at once. It was horrifying. It was the smell of the powder itself. I stumbled off the chair, my foot catching the edge, and I went down hard on one knee. The impact barely registered. My whole world had contracted to the raw, physical sensations overwhelming my body. The spinning room, the sick churning in my gut, the foul, chemical rot that seemed to be radiating from the inside of my own skull. I crawled a few feet away from the chair, gagging, my hands pressed against the carpet. And in that moment, kneeling on my bedroom floor, dizzy and sick and gasping for clean air, the last pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a prank, it wasn't a weirdo with a thing for potpourri. I was being drugged. Someone was pumping a chemical, a poison, a substance into the air I breathed every single night. The good days and the bad days, those weren't random. Those were the days he did it, and the days he didn't. The smell was the delivery system. The powder was the payload. He was poisoning me. Slowly, methodically, patiently. Turning my safe haven, my quiet sanctuary, into a gas chamber. The realization was so profound, so absolutely terrifying, that it cut through the dizziness for a single crystal-clear moment of pure, undiluted horror. My breath hitched. My eyes, still blurry with tears, shot back up to the ceiling, back to the vent. It looked the same. Innocuous. A simple white rectangle against a white ceiling. But it wasn't innocent anymore. It was a weapon. It was the barrel of a gun pointed at my head while I slept. And in that precise moment, as I stared up at it in dawning, sickening comprehension, I heard a sound. It was not a loud sound. It was tiny. It was almost nothing. But in the ringing silence of my apartment, amplified by my terror, it was as loud as a gunshot. From directly above the vent, from inside the ceiling. Click. It was a sharp, dry, metallic sound. A clean sound. The sound of a small latch being closed. The sound of a tiny metal cover being snapped shut. The sound of an observation peephole, a hidden lens, a secret port, being sealed after the show was over. He had been watching. The dizziness returned with a vengeance. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just physical anymore. It was the vertigo of the soul. He knew. He had seen me climb the chair. He had seen me inhale the powder. He had seen the look of realization on my face. And he knew that I knew. The world didn't come back into focus. If anything, it got worse. That single sharp click from the ceiling seemed to sever an anchor inside my head, and I was just adrift. Adrift in the spinning room. Adrift in the chemical tide rising in my stomach. Adrift in a new reality that was 1,000,000 times more terrifying than just thinking I was going crazy. He knew. He had been watching me. He saw me put the chair down. He saw me climb up. He saw the cloud of his poison hit my face, and he must have seen the understanding in my eyes right before he closed his little spy hole. That click wasn't just him hiding. It was an acknowledgement. It was a period at the end of a sentence. The sentence was, the game is over. My brain, sluggish and thick as it was, screamed a single coherent word at me. Phone. Phone. Call someone. Call anyone. Call the police. Tell them what? That my neighbor drugged me through the vents and was watching me through a peephole? It sounded insane. It sounded like a paranoid delusion, the kind of thing they send a social worker for, not a SWAT team. But what other choice did I have? I was still on the floor, on my hands and knees, the carpet fibers pressed into my palms. I tried to push myself up, but my arms were shaky, like I'd just done 100 push-ups. I managed to get into a clumsy crouch, my head swimming violently. I had to focus. I left my phone on the nightstand, right next to the lamp. It felt like it was a mile away. I took a breath. A mistake. The air was still thick with that monstrous, two-faced smell, the sweet, rotting floral scent on top, and underneath, the harsh, metallic tang of the chemical itself. It was like breathing in a lie. I stumbled toward the nightstand, my hand outstretched. My fingers brushed the cool glass surface of my water carafe before finding the smooth, hard shape of my phone. I grabbed it. My hand was shaking so badly that the phone vibrated against the wood of the nightstand. I brought it up to my face, squinting. The screen was a bright, painful blur. 911. 3 numbers. A child could do it. But my thumb felt disconnected from my brain. It was clumsy, thick, and disobedient. I jabbed at the screen, trying to swipe up to unlock it. I missed. I tried again, my thumb sliding off the edge. A wave of pure, hopeless panic washed over me. I was going to die here, on my bedroom floor, too dizzy and uncoordinated to even call for help. It was then I heard the second sound. And this sound changed everything. It wasn't the quiet, insidious scratching of before. It wasn't the subtle, secret click of a peephole. This was a sound of intent. A sound of force. Scrape. It came from the vent. A raw, metallic grating. The sound of a screwdriver tip, maybe, being jammed into the slit between the metal grate and the plaster of the ceiling. It was loud. Unapologetically loud. He wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. There was no more pretense. No more stealth. He knew that I knew. And he had decided that the time for games, for slowly poisoning me, was over. He was coming in. Scrape. Rying. A high-pitched metallic shriek as the tool ground against the vent cover. The sound vibrated right through the bones in my skull. The dizziness, the nausea. It all vanished, burned away by a flood of pure, ice-cold adrenaline. The phone in my hand was useless. There was no time. 911 wouldn't be fast enough. He was already at the gate. A thought, clear and sharp, cut through the terror. He can't see me if it's dark. I didn't even think about it. My body just moved. I lurched the 2 steps to my nightstand and slammed my hand down on the base of the lamp. The room plunged into darkness. Not total darkness. The city outside my window never really slept. A pale, gray-orange glow filtered in, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. My rocking chair in the corner became a hunched figure. My laundry basket looked like a crouching beast. But it was dark enough. Dark enough to hide. I backed away from the window, away from the faint light, pressing myself into the corner beside my closet. My breath was ragged, loud in my own ears. I forced myself to hold it, my lungs burning. My eyes were locked on that pale rectangle on the ceiling. Pop. A single, percussive sound. One of the screws holding the vent cover in place had given way. I could see it now, a slight sag on one corner of the grate. My heart, which had been hammering, seemed to stop altogether. I was a statue carved from fear. I could feel the cold of the wall behind me, the rough texture of the paint. It was the only thing that felt real. He worked at the other side. More scraping. A low, frustrated grunt from above. It was so close. It was happening right there, just a layer of drywall, and a few feet of empty space separating us. The sound was so intimate, so invasive. He was in my ceiling. He was in my room. Then, with a final ugly tear of metal, the other side gave way. The vent cover didn't fall. It swung down on one remaining, twisted corner, dangling like a broken jaw. It hung there for a second, swaying slightly in the silence. It revealed a perfect square of absolute blackness. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I didn't exist. I was just a pair of eyes, wide with terror, staring into that void. For a long second, there was nothing, just the oppressive silence, and that dark hole in my ceiling. Maybe he'd given up? Maybe he realized he couldn't fit? A tiny, stupid spark of hope flickered in my chest. And then, something moved in the black. It wasn't fast. It was a slow, deliberate shift. Something pale emerged from the deeper darkness. It took my drug-addled brain a moment to process what I was seeing. It was an eye. A single, human eye, floating in that square of black. The city light from the window caught it just enough to give it a wet, sickening sheen. The iris was pale, a washed-out blue or gray. It blinked, slowly, once. Then it began to move, darting back and forth, methodically scanning the room below. It scanned the bed, the rocking chair, the doorway to the hall. It was searching. It was looking for me. I was frozen. My body was screaming at me to run, to scream, to do something. But I was locked in place, pinned by that grotesque, disembodied gaze. I could feel a low whimper building in my throat, and I clamped my jaw shut so hard my teeth ached. Don't make a sound. Don't move a muscle. He can't see you in the dark. He can't see you. The eye continued its sweep, moving across the faint shapes of my furniture. It was systematic, calculating, and then it reached my corner, the darkest part of the room. It stopped. The frantic darting ceased. The eye became perfectly still, the pale iris zeroing in on the shadows where I stood. It wasn't scanning anymore. It wasn't searching. It had found me. There was no mistaking it. In that moment we were connected, the hunter and the prey. It saw me. It saw me flattened against the wall, my hands pressed over my mouth, my eyes wide. For what felt like an eternity, we just stayed like that. The eye in the ceiling, me in the corner. The silence in the room was absolute, a crushing weight. I could see the man it belonged to. The quiet, nondescript man from the elevator, the one with the empty-looking stare. I could see him lying on his floor, his face pressed to the hole he'd made, his one eye fixed on his prize. On me. He knew. And he knew that I could see him. The scraping stopped. The eye didn't blink. It just stared. And then it pulled back, disappearing into the blackness as suddenly as it had appeared. The hanging vent cover swayed gently. For a single beautiful second I thought it was over. Maybe seeing me, seeing that I was aware, had spooked him. Maybe he was retreating. Then I heard the new sounds. Not from the ceiling. From above the ceiling. A heavy, shuffling sound on the floorboards above me. The sound of a man getting to his feet. It wasn't frantic. It was deliberate. Heavy, thump, thump, thump. Footsteps moving away from the hole in his floor. Footsteps moving across his living room, directly over my head. Moving toward his front door. My blood ran cold. The phone was still on the nightstand. The keys were in the bowl by the door. The door was locked, dead-bolted. Was that enough? I heard the distinct, metallic thunk of his deadbolt being turned. I heard the creak of his apartment door swinging open into the public hallway. The threat was no longer contained. He was outside. He was in the hall. My paralysis broke. I was no longer a statue. I was an animal in a trap. I scrambled out of the corner, my sneakers slipping on the laminate floor. I didn't know what I was doing, only that I had to get out. Get out. Get out. And then, I heard it. The sound that will haunt me until the day I die. The heavy fire door to the stairwell, just down the hall from his apartment, opened with a weighty thump and the hiss of its hydraulic closer. Followed by footsteps. Not walking. Running. Heavy, pounding footsteps on the concrete stairs. Coming down. He was coming. He was coming for me. There wasn't time for a plan. There wasn't time for anything but the animal part of my brain, the part that had been sleeping for 28 years, suddenly screaming one single command. Move. The sound of his feet on the concrete stairs, heavy and fast, was a physical thing. It was a drumbeat counting down the seconds of my life. I launched myself off the floor, slipping on the cheap laminate, and scrambled for the door. My mind was a blank white panic. Keys. Phone. I'd grabbed my phone from the nightstand. It was still clutched in my sweaty hand. The keys were in the little ceramic bowl by the door where they always were. My fingers, clumsy and useless moments ago, were now surprisingly nimble. They plunged into the bowl, found the cold, familiar jangle of metal, and closed around them. My front door had 2 locks, a standard one in the knob, and a deadbolt. 3 full turns. I'd always liked that, it felt secure. Now, it was 3 ticks of a clock I didn't have time for. My hands shook so violently the keys rattled against the lock plate. 1 turned. 2. On the 3rd, the heavy bolt slid back with a loud final-sounding thunk. I twisted the knob and pulled the door open, not looking back into the dark room with its dangling vent and its poison air. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile yellow-white glow on the beige walls and the muted floral carpet. For a split second, it was so normal, it felt like I had imagined everything. Then I heard it. The heavy metal door of the stairwell at the far end of the hall, near his apartment, slammed shut. Wumpus. He was on my floor. The elevator was closer. My thumb, slick with sweat, mashed the down button over and over. A small, pathetic plastic square lighting up each time I pressed it. I could hear his footsteps now, fast and heavy on the carpet. Not running. Not yet. A quick, purposeful walk. He knew I was out here. He knew I didn't have anywhere to go. The little digital display above the elevator doors showed the car was on floor 16. I was on the 8th. It wasn't coming. It wasn't coming fast enough. He was 20 yards away. 15. I could see him now. Just a shape at the far end of the hall. The same nondescript man from the elevator. The same gray hoodie. He wasn't looking at me. His head was down, like he was just on his way to get his mail. The casualness of it was sickening. I abandoned the elevator. My only other option was the other stairwell, the one at my end of the hall. It was maybe 30 feet away. It felt like a mile. I turned and ran, my sneakers making soft, desperate slapping sounds on the carpet. I didn't dare look back. I just ran towards the metal door marked exit. I heard his pace change behind me. The walk became a jog, then an all-out run. The soft thuds of his sneakers became heavy, angry pounds that seemed to shake the floor. He was faster than me, bigger. I reached the stairwell door and slammed my shoulder into the push bar. It flew open with a groan, and I plunged into the dark, concrete well. The door started hissing shut behind me. I had a 2-second head start. I didn't take the stairs one by one. I jumped, taking them 3 or 4 at a time, my hand slapping against the gritty, cold metal railing to keep my balance. The door at the top of the stairs slammed open before it had even fully closed. He was in the stairwell with me. The acoustics in there were a nightmare. Every sound was amplified, echoing in the tight space. My ragged, screaming breaths, the frantic slap of my shoes on the concrete, and behind me, louder, heavier, the thud, thud, thud of his pursuit. He wasn't even breathing hard. It was just a steady, relentless, machine-like sound. Coming closer. 7. My phone. I had to call. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I fumbled it open, my thumb swiping wildly at the screen. My eyes couldn't focus on the numbers. I just mashed the emergency call icon. It connected. 6. 911. What is your emergency? The woman's voice was calm. A voice from another universe where people weren't being hunted in a dark stairwell. He's chasing me, I gasped, my words coming out in ragged chunks between breaths. My apartment building. He's right behind me. Okay, miss. Where are you? What's the address? 5. I could hear him. Maybe 1 flight behind me. The sound of his feet was a physical pressure on my back. The Grand Inn, I sobbed, leaping down another half flight. My ankle twisted and a hot spike of pain shot up my leg, but I didn't slow down. 244 West Elm. I'm in the stairwell. He's my neighbor. He was in my vents. It sounded insane. I sounded insane. Who is chasing you, miss? Can you describe him? 4. Apartment 9B. I'm in 8B. Please. He's so close. I could hear a low grunt from him, a sound of effort. He was taking the stairs 2 at a time. The gap was closing. 3. Just stay on the line with me, miss. We have units on their way. Can you get out of the stairwell? 2. The ground floor. I saw the push bar for the lobby door. It was my entire world. It was a glowing beacon of hope in the grimy darkness. I didn't even try to talk anymore. I just poured every last ounce of energy I had into a final, desperate burst of speed. I hit the door with my entire body weight. It flew open and I stumbled out into the lobby, collapsing onto the polished marble floor. The light was blinding. The air was clean. There was a doorman standing behind his podium, his mouth agape. A couple waiting for the elevator stared at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. I had made it. I was surrounded by people. I scrambled backwards on my hands and knees, my chest heaving, and looked at the stairwell door. A second later, it opened. He stood there, framed in the doorway. His face was flushed, his chest rising and falling, a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. He wasn't the monster from the darkness anymore. He was just a man in a gray hoodie, looking slightly out of breath. His eyes, those same pale, washed-out eyes from the vent, found mine across the lobby. There was no anger in them, no rage, just a look of profound, chilling disappointment. Like a collector who had just dropped and shattered a priceless vase. He saw the doorman reaching for his phone. He saw the other couple staring. He took one step back into the stairwell, and the heavy door hissed shut, erasing him from view. I stayed on the floor, shaking and sobbing, the 911 operator's voice, still a tiny, tinny sound coming from the phone, lying beside me on the cold marble. It was over. I was safe. The police were there in what felt like 3 minutes. They were calm, professional. They took my statement, my hands trembling so hard I could barely hold the pen to sign it. They had men covering the exits and sweeping the building. It didn't take them long. They found him back in his apartment, 9B, sitting in a chair in his living room, just waiting. He didn't resist. I sat in the lobby for what felt like hours, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket one of the paramedics gave me. The building manager showed up. A detective with tired eyes and a kind face came and sat with me, asking me the same questions over again. I told him everything. The smell, the white powder, the eye in the vent. I knew how it sounded. I was expecting disbelief, a recommendation for a psych evaluation. But he just nodded slowly, writing in his little notepad. "We're searching his apartment now," he said. "You're safe. You did good. Calling when you did." About an hour later, the same detective came back. His face was different. The professional kindness was gone, replaced by a look of deep, profound disturbance. He looked sick. He said, his voice low. "We need to talk about what we found." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "We found no weapons," he started. "No knives, no guns, nothing like that." I felt a small, foolish flicker of relief. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe he was just a peeping Tom, a weirdo. "But his back bedroom," the detective trailed off, pinching the bridge of his nose. "It wasn't a bedroom. It was a lab. Not a professional one. An amateur setup. Beakers, hot plates, chemical jars, microscopes." My blood went cold again. "On the walls. He had pictures of you. Hundreds of them." He looked at me, his eyes full of something like pity. Not social media stuff. These were candid. You at the coffee shop down the street, you walking to your car, you unlocking your front door, all taken from a distance with a long lens. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the sides of my chair. "That's not the worst part," he said, and his voice dropped even lower. "We found his journal." He opened his notepad. "That white powder we found traces of on your vent and all over his workspace. We're still analyzing it, but his notes are very specific. It's a mixture, spores from a very rare species of fungus and a synthetic chemical sedative, a neuroparalytic." I stared at him, not understanding. "A poison? He was trying to kill me?" The detective shook his head, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. He was looking at his notepad, at the words he had written down. "No," he said, and the single word hung in the air, heavy and awful. "Not kill you, the opposite. According to his notes, the dosage he was administering through your vent wasn't lethal. It was designed to be cumulative, to build up in your system over weeks." He finally looked up at me, and I will never, ever forget the look in his eyes. It was the look of a man who had seen the absolute worst of human nature. "It wouldn't have killed you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It would have slowly, systematically shut down your motor nervous system. You would have become paralyzed, completely immobile, but the chemical compound he used specifically leaves the sensory parts of the brain untouched. You would still be able to see, to hear, to feel, and especially to smell." The world tilted on its axis. The lobby, the police, the flashing lights outside. It all faded into a dull hum. All I could hear was his voice. "He wasn't trying to murder you, Anne. He wanted to keep you. His journal is full of it. He calls it preservation. He wanted to turn you into a living statue. A flower, he writes, that he could keep in your room, helpless, while he controlled the fragrance he pumped in. He wanted to own you, forever, as a piece of his collection." He closed his notebook. The gentle click of the cover shutting was the loudest sound I had ever heard. "His last entry," the detective said, his voice hoarse. "We found it on his desk, written tonight, probably right after he got back to his apartment. It's just one line." He took a deep breath. "A flower never truly wilts if it's preserved correctly. She will be the most beautiful specimen in my collection."